Hi guys, so today I'm going to be showing you, or more kind of like walking you through some code that I've produced to create a login script with Flask. This is principally for the use of my students, but I'm also willing to receive feedback on it if you want to write anything in the comments below. This is my first attempt to create an app with Flask, and so more than welcome to hear feedback as if there's a better way of doing it. So the app that I'm going to be creating is a login form. The purpose of this was really just to sort of demonstrate how to get some HTML, get some data, post it over to a Flask module, and then get the Flask module then to use that data, open up a database and check in the database and send some data back and then get that on the screen. And so it's kind of like a full web scraping exercise for my students. I'm just going to go in at the code. If you want to learn a little bit more about this or use the code yourself, it's on my GitHub account, and hopefully this will form part of a wider bit of documentation where I show you how to actually get the code up and running and what things you need to install on there as well. So without further ado, I'm going to just start walking you through the code. So I think what I'll start with is I'll have a look at the actual project files that come with this code. So I tried to follow the sort of standard method of organizing your files that was in the docs, just for when you have a really small file, so like a modular approach. I know there's a different way of, if you've got a bigger project and you're going to put it into a package, I know there's a different way of configuring it, but I haven't looked into that yet. So going through the files, you have two main folders. You'll have your main project folder, and then within there you've got static. That's for all the bits of HTML that aren't going to change irrespective of what input you're given. And so in there is just my CSS file. So my CSS file stores the kind of the look and feel of the login form. So it's just really simple. It's just specifying the different types of inputs, as in the bits on the screen, what padding they'll have. So this is just display stuff. And if you want to learn a little bit more about it, then maybe do a tutorial on CSS. And then inside templates, so these are almost HTML. They're HTML with a little bit of code in it called Ginger, or Ginger 2, and what this does is it will give you, it's what you'd expect to be HTML. In fact, I'll show you the one with Ginger 2 in. So profile.html, so this has got Ginger 2, so here it says welcome username, so I'm going to give it that data. So once the person's actually logged in, the page that will display we welcome username. And then the other one, these are both dynamic, login.html. Again, this is HTML. There's a little bit of JavaScript up here to validate my form input. So if they don't actually type anything in, it pings up a little pop-up box. But more importantly than the JavaScript is that you've got this code here, and basically saying that, so if an error has occurred, then I'm going to pass that error message before I show the form. So when I triggered this HTML displaying, if I sent an error message with that error message occurs here, and then I draw the form. But if there was no error message, then it's just the form that was drawn. Okay, so that was the static files. They don't change. Template files, they are HTML files with data that's been given to them. All right, moving down, you've got app.py. So app.py, that's the actual Python file that deals with the form inputs. And I'm going to go over that in a bit more detail in a bit. I've got config.py. There's nothing in that at the moment, but I believe we have that there, so that you can, when you first install it, you can get all the settings set up. A license is just the license that came with GitHub. README, that's my GitHub, and then users.db, that's my database, so that's my backend, that's where the usernames and passwords store. So that's the format of the file structure behind it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the terminal. So I've got this running. You get it running through, I'll do that in more detail in another video, but to get it running you just need to type in flask.run into the command line in the terminal, or it might be the case that you can actually click play, but I haven't got that working yet. So get it running, and it starts running on this IP address. So I'm just going to copy and paste that over into Internet Explorer. Okay, let's get that over there. Okay, there we go. And just resize it a touch, so you can hopefully you can see the form. So first of all, note that I came in at 127.0.0.1. That's an IP address, and it was operating on port 500. And also, if I type in login, that redirects me to the same place. So they're the same. You come in via the root, but also if you were to type in login, you're going to come to the same place. And in here, I can type in a username and a password. And let's just look at some of the other features. So if I click submit, it says the name must be filled out. Okay. If I pop a name in, but I don't put a password in, it'll say the password needs to be filled out. So it's got some validation checks in there. Let's just pop in an incorrect username, Bobby, and a fake password. Now in there, so that therefore an error message has come through here, and that's been displayed invalid username and password. And then hopefully I'll remember the correct username and password. Okay, and then that just puts through to welcome Bob. Okay, so that's the limit of the application. It's not a big application. I'm just going to go through the code that's associated with that. Okay, so I'm just going to go straight into the code. Well, let's look at some of the dependencies up here. So, to be honest, I don't know what G does. Let's from Flask, import Flask. Flask, that's the main kind of Flask file. It deals with getting Flask running. It's kind of like a little mini web server. Request, that deals with the data that's coming back off the form, and render template, that draws HTML. SQLite 3, that's my database, and I don't know what G does. I believe it's something to do with my database files. I'm going to skip over the back end and just go straight to the front end. So when you've got these class decorators, I'd really recommend that you watch the very start of read the quick start guide on Flask before you go through this. But this project is from me internalizing that quick start guide. So to start with, app_root/ and app_root/login both work. So they both root to this code. So when I type in 127.0.0.1/or/login, then this code here is running. And then in addition to that, when I do login, that's going to accept off it a GET request and a POST request, and that's important. So GET request is just, can I have this HTML, can I have this specific URL? And a POST request is, can I have this URL? And also, in the last session, I typed in when I came onto this page, I typed in some stuff onto a form, and it had posted it in the body of that request. So it basically means that I've been on the form, typed some stuff in, and sent it at that point. So I'll come to the error handling in a bit. So if request.method equals post, that means that I have used the form already, and I've clicked OK, and now I am going back into the same form already. And then it says if the login was valid and form request gets the data. So this username here is the username that was given on the HTML box. I'm just going to show you that. So I've got username and password. Let's go into HTML and have a look at that. So HTML login. So on my HTML login here, I've got this. And here I've written name equals username. Okay, so that is kind of like a variable name for that input, and that's how I'm calling that in app. So I'm saying get that data that I've just been posted to me. So when I went onto here, and I click. So this time round, it's not post, it's just a get method. However, when I type in some data and I click submit, I'm going to post that, and that's going to be called username, and that's going to be called password. Right. And so if it's valid, so if they exist in the database, I'm going to run login the user, and I'm going to pass to it the username, just the username in this instance. Otherwise, I'm going to change error from being none to error saying there's an invalid username and password. And then, irrespective of what, and then, so at this point, that the HTML, that this will go and this will send back some HTML, and I'll return that to the main form. So login the user here renders profile.html with the username added into it. Whereas if that's not called, it infers there's been an error, and then what I do is I render the HTML template again, so I run that page again, but I pass to it error. So you'll note that when I look at that login page, I'm saying that if an error has existed, write that error message on the screen, this one here, invalid username and password. I'll just go through that with you. So here, if I write something, I click there A and submit, sorry, not that, and submit, that error message is passed through. Okay, so that's how you get data off the page. So that's how you get the form data back into Flask. You use this request.form method, and the square brackets is the name of the input element that you used. So, you know, if I had one called address in here, input type equals text, name equals address, then to get that address I would need to write request.form, and that would have to be address. And note here also that I'm basically saying that if I'm posting, this is the post data, so that's the data that's been posted to it as part of the form. Okay, right, so I've gone through what happens when I log in the user. But what I didn't explain is how do I test whether it's a valid login. There's one little thing I'm going to do first. I'm going to talk to you about the mechanism actually on the form end. So how does the form know to actually go back to the login page? So the form knows to post it to this page here, login. And so I'll show you how it knows. So on the form, up here, I've got action login. And that means once I click this submit button, then I'm going to go to that URL. So I'm going to go to that address. And on top of that, the method is post. And that means don't place any of this in the URL. Don't place the username and password in the URL, because if someone was looking over your shoulder, you wouldn't want it to appear. Instead, hide it and send it over via the post method. And so then the Python responds to that, going, oh, right, I know that this is a post, I'm going to do this certain thing. The other kind of nuance of this is, how do I get the pop-ups to work? Well, as well as if this action doesn't happen unless onSubmit is successful. So this onSubmit triggers some JavaScript, which is up here. One of my students made this for me. It's very simple. I think it might even be, you might even be able to cut and paste it off W3 School. So basically it's saying, look, in JavaScript, that's how you get, it's saying the name of the form was login form, get the username, and the value from the username, store it as X, and if X is empty or a empty string, then write an alert that say name such as must be filled out. Otherwise, if the password is empty, do the same thing. You can imagine you could have use JavaScript to validate in various different ways. And JavaScript is really good because it offloads a lot of the processing from your server onto the client's machine. Fab. Okay. So then I suppose the only thing I need to do now is talk through the back end and how actually once I've got the user and passwords, that's the mechanism for getting the data off a form into the Flask file. And now from the Flask file, how do I actually look at a database and get the data out? So let's go back and look at the app. So here because I posted it in, that's the username and password, and they are passed, the username and password are passed in, or in fact, they're passed in as the username and password into this function called valid login. So let's go up to there. So valid login. Right, what this does is it runs a query on the database that says select everything from the database from the table user where the username is something and the password is something. and then in this list it propagates the username that I've given and the password. So just say I gave Bob36, it would place it. This would then become select everything from the table user where the username is Bob and the password is 36. To be honest, answers in the comments totally fine. I don't know what 1 equals true is, so I've got this off the Flask documentation, and I've said, look, if the user is none, as in if it didn't find anything, return false. But if it found something, then return true. So if it's returning if there's a record in the database with that username and that password, I'm going to return true. And that's me basically verifying that the user exists in the database with the password that they typed in. Right now, you're probably wondering, well, this query.db looks, where did that come from? Well, that was written. And this, I can only describe as boilerplate. I'm aware that SQLite has a function called execute, and that you can run a query and pass some arguments to it. And an execute is run on a connection. So I'm assuming that .db connects to the database. And then once you've run that query, that gets placed into a cursor, which I think is like a cursor on the screen. And then you can fetch all the data from that cursor. And then finally it closes. So what does getDB do? Up here, getDB connects to database, and the name of the database is written up here as it's in capitals because it's a constant. And then app.teardownContext, I believe this releases, just say the context changes and I move off the page or something, I believe this closes the database if that's the case. And so that's roughly an overview of how my Flask app works. If you look at the documentation that's found here, so if you look at the docs that I've written, you'll see some additional tasks that you can actually get stuck in with, and ways that you can improve this, and maybe that should be the basis of your learning from this point. But on that note, thank you very much.